speaking. They will be arranging the speaker meetings. I hope they run the meetings. I'm certainly willing to help, but I won't be in charge anymore. And it really is someone else's turn to be in charge. So I'm happy to turn it over to new presidents. So we have a very exciting speaker for tonight. We've actually had some fabulous speakers all year long. We have Matthew Diep. Matthew Diep is speaking on behalf of the LGBT community tonight. And Matthew is the founder of something called PSYPHER, Psypher, which is a project to find recovery and wellness through art. So he has designed this and invites other people to participate in Psypher. It's kind of a youth organizer mental health advocacy organization. And Matthew recently received the Rising Star Award from NAMI West Los Angeles, LA, because he truly is a rising star. He was also interviewed by NAMI National, 3 young people about this subject, LGBTQ subject, were interviewed, and it is a national, it's being showcased nationally, conversations and discussions about the LGBT community, and Matthew is part of that conversation. So we look forward, Matthew, to seeing this and listening to this. And we're so delighted you're here with us tonight. We're so delighted, and we're just thrilled to honor Mental Health Pride Month with you speaking for us. So I want to just turn the meeting over to our Executive Director, Erin Raftery, who's just going to say a few words before we turn the meeting over to Matthew.
Thank you, Sharon, for that warm welcome. And you always do such a great job to include everyone and give such a lovely introduction, so thank you. And I have a feeling that we are going to maybe be requesting you to do some maybe honorary hosting in the next couple of years, just because you've done such a good job. So thank you for curating this speaker series. Matthew, it's such a pleasure. Thank you so much for jumping in, and we're really excited to kick off June Pride Month for LGBTQI, and we're just excited to hear your story. I'm actually going to drop in a link in the chat as well for that interview that Sharon was talking about NAMI National. And maybe we can turn up that Diana Ross again a little bit. I don't know, that was exciting. So thank you for just all that you do for the mental health community, Psypher LA. For those of you that joined us at the 3rd Street Promenade for Mental Health Awareness Celebration Service, there were our Psypher dancers, and they were up on the stage. And I can't wait to hear a little bit more about that, Matthew. Maybe you can share that with the rest of the group. But just very exciting stuff. And yes, you are a rising star. So thanks so much for being here tonight.
Thank you so much, Erin. And yeah, honored to be here. If the music's ever like distracting or too loud, just let me know. I don't want it to be like annoying. But yeah, I'm super excited to be here tonight. My name's Matthew Diep. Y'all can call me Matt. Like was mentioned, I started a nonprofit called Psypher. Psypher is a mental health prevention program. It's youth-led, and our goal is to use expressive outlets, and one of the main ones that we use is dance as a way to help youth get into the conversation about mental health, and not just be able to talk about it, but have a way to build community and connect with one another. A lot of why I got into mental health advocacy really stems from my lived experience. I really struggled a lot with depression and anxiety in high school. It was a big challenge for me. And a lot of it stemmed from being gay and not having the resources to understand that this was a natural part of my identity, and that it was okay to be gay. I grew up in a lot of environments that were not very supportive of my identity or didn't talk about, the queer experience. And at the same time, there weren't a lot of resources for mental health as well. So I wasn't able to really grasp what I was going through. And I'll leave that as sort of the preface for today, rather than having like one big block of where I just tell my whole story. I want to go through this presentation, have a conversation with all of you, and kind of share bits of my story throughout. So yeah, I'm just excited to be here and share this space with all of you. And fun fact, yeah. That song that I'm coming out was actually when I actually came out. My first friend that I told, she played that song on the radio for me. It was like a cheesy but super cute moment. So I love that song. Every Pride Month, that's like my soundtrack. But yeah, I'm going to kind of start us off with a poll, and this is just to kind of get a sense of what our intentions are for being here today. And that'll help kind of guide the conversation a little bit. So I'm going to share my screen. And so if you can go to, on your device, you can go to pollev.com/dip, just my last name. You can copy and paste that in your browser, or if you want to use your phone, you can text DIP to 37607. This is just an option because I want this to be a very open, safe space to learn and ask questions and be curious. And I know sometimes around these topics, like if we don't quite know everything or it's not our lived experience, it can feel scary to ask a question. Like maybe you're scared of sounding like, you know, you don't know enough or whatever. But I just want you all to know, like, this is such a safe space for that. So I just want this as a tool, this poll, in case anyone's like uncomfortable asking something out loud, that you can share your honest opinions, your questions, and everything in this space without us knowing who asked it. And at the same time, feel free absolutely to just ask things out loud. That's totally fine too. So I just want to open up that option for us as we go into today. So yeah, please use this poll to let me know what are your intentions for being here today, or you can answer in the chat. And Liz, this is write a response. So far I'm seeing having a discussion about the intersection between mental health and the LGBTQ community, to listen and learn. I love hearing community voices sharing their stories and experiences. Yes, and I'll be really intentional to make sure that I open space for you all to share as well. It's not just going to be like a one-way dialogue. Anyone else want to share their intention for being here today? You can use this polling tool, you can use the chat, or you can unmute and just share out loud if you want. And while some of you all probably type in or thinking about this, my intention for today, I just want to hold this space with my lived experience. I can't speak for the entire, LGBTQ experience. There's so many different identities and lenses to speak from, but I can speak from mine as a gay man who grew up in a Christian community, who grew up in an Asian American community, and navigating the intersection of all of those identities. And as I talk about faith in my story, I also want to make sure it's clear, like, I don't think there's anything wrong with having faith. I don't think having faith and having access to mental health resources and being queer, I don't think those are mutually exclusive. I think those can all exist together. But yeah, that's definitely gonna be a part of my story today. All right, see, I'm LGBTQ, who came out in the past 1.5 years. Congratulations. I love all community conversations that provide space to learn and talk about it with accepting. I think it cut off a little bit. All right. Cool. And then I see Erin, listen, learn, honor this LGBTQIA space. All right. Cool. So let's go ahead and get started. This is really helpful. And I see with accepting people and hear other people's experiences as well. All right. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm gonna switch over to our slides. So yeah, welcome to our LGBTQ plus mental health presentation. Kicking off Pride Month strong. Thank you everyone for making the time to be here. So just starting off real basic, what does LGBTQ plus mean? It's an acronym. Many of you probably know it stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer or questioning. And the plus leaves room for the fact that there's so many other identities out there that this acronym's always going to be flexible to grow and change. So that plus just recognizes that there isn't like just these boxes that we can put people in and call it a day. That's like the really liberating thing about being queer, part of the LGBTQ plus community, is that we don't have to be in a particular box, but there's all these different identities that can maybe help us understand what we're feeling or what we are expressing, and just gives us different avenues to explore. So something I just want to make a point when we have these acronyms is they're not here so that we can have like a label that makes us comfortable to understand each other. It's more so for whoever's using that label, they're using that as a way to express themselves and understand themselves. But we don't have to take on that like responsibility of trying to label each other. But yeah, you may hear LGBTQIA, you may hear LGBTQIA2S+, like there's a lot of different acronyms. So we want to encourage you to do research on different identities. After this presentation, if you've heard 2S+, that stands for two-spirited, and that comes from Native culture. And the idea that, we think about non-binary and trans people in American culture, it's almost been this hard thing for people to grasp, but in a lot of indigenous cultures, that's been part of their cultures for a very long time. So that's something I really encourage you to look into. Mukses are another group of people and identity that I would encourage you to look into, that kind of explores, or that shows how being non-binary and the trans experience has been a really important part, and even a religious and spiritual part of many cultures for a long time. But yeah, June is Pride Month. We're kicking it off today. So why does it matter? Well, for many reasons, being queer, identifying as LGBTQ plus hasn't always been very safe. We haven't had a lot of the same legal rights as other community members. And even today, right, there's still not a lot of safety for our community depending on where we are. So having a month where we can celebrate our progress as a community, how much we've been able to grow, it really means a lot. But Pride Month is centered around some historic moments as well. And I'm just curious, with a show of hands, who's heard of the Stonewall Uprising and like knows the story pretty well? Okay, see 1, 2, 3, like 3.5. Yeah. So the Stonewall Uprising occurred in 1969, and there was a gay bar called the Stonewall Inn. This is actually in New York. And so individuals there were trying to defend themselves against police harassment and persecution against LGBTQ people, especially a lot of trans women and drag queens at the time. Sorry, there's like a loud siren. They weren't allowed into bars and clubs. If you weren't very like straight passing, like if you were obviously queer through the way that you expressed yourself, there was a lot of discrimination and harassment. A lot of people actually weren't let into these bars. And so there was a lot of resistance from people in the queer community. And an individual named Marsha P. Johnson, a Black trans woman, during this time actually threw a brick to the police officers in protest and started this uprising, right? And community members all joined in and were just throwing bricks and standing up for themselves. And this was like a really big moment in queer history because it set the tone for, we're not going to keep sitting here and taking this. We're here to fight back, and we have community members to back us. And this was kind of like a good example for showing that in a lot of these movements where queer people were standing up to hate and discrimination, oftentimes at the forefront of those movements were Black and other POC trans women, drag queens, and sex workers who were standing up for the queer community. And oftentimes their names and their stories get left out of history because these are such marginalized groups. But we want to make sure that, especially on Pride Month, that we're really centering these most marginalized communities for the work they did. And it makes sense, right? Because at the time, racism was a lot worse than it was now. Being a trans woman, being a drag queen, it was so much more unsafe. So they drew a lot of attention and a lot of the hate towards them. But because that hate was coming out, it gave us a place to like name it and fight against it in the same way that that happened at the Stonewall in the Stonewall Uprising. So when we think about a lot of the rights that we have, like marriage being legalized, we really owe it to these very marginalized groups in our community. So oftentimes we see our pride parades, our rallies, our marches, and it's really fun. You know, we see the rainbow washing everything. And as we're celebrating that and sharing in that joy, we just want to make sure that we're centering the history behind it and uplifting our POC communities. So yeah, just before we dive in, we're going to talk more about mental health, some of the statistics that we know about the LGBTQ community. Some of them might be very triggering because maybe of your own experiences or someone you know. So at any time, if something gets uncomfortable, please do whatever you need to take care of yourself. You can turn off your camera, do anything to self-soothe, step away, and there's no need to ask for permission. All right. So these are some statistics that help paint a picture of the fact that LGBTQ youth have higher mental health risks. They're an at-risk population when we think about different mental health statistics. For example, LGBTQ plus teens are 6 times more likely to experience symptoms of depression than non-LGBTQ plus identifying teens. They're more than twice as likely to feel suicidal and more than 4 times as likely to attempt than heterosexual youth. 42% of LGBTQ youth seriously considered attempting suicide in the past year, including more than half of transgender and non-binary youth. And then for non-binary, that means that individuals don't necessarily identify as man or woman. Another word that you might have heard is gender neutral, just in case that's a new word. And so in the past year, nearly half of LGBTQ youth have wanted counseling from a mental health professional, but didn't receive the help that they wanted. So as we look at these statistics, I'm just curious, and we can put it in the chat box. And I'm getting some messages about the poll being a little bit tough to access. So let's just use the chat box. What do you think is contributing to these statistics? Like when you see this, are you surprised? But curious to hear your thoughts. Like, what do you think is contributing to these statistics? And maybe think about from the lens of your community, your culture. Think about like the environment you grew up in. What might be contributing to some of these statistics? I can share a little bit and I'll open up the floor. You can unmute or you can use the chat. But you know, where I grew up, there was a lot of like gay shaming, just even in the language that we use. Don't be such a faggot, like that kind of language just being really normalized. And when I express myself a little bit more feminine or dress a little less masculine, you know, you get teased as being like a girl or being gay. And I grew up in Asian communities, so I feel like that sense of hyper-masculinity was really heightened. And the gender roles between men and women were really, really strongly defined. So stepping out of that put you in a very vulnerable position in the community I grew up in. But yeah, I'm curious to hear for the rest of you. Seeing the chat, shame, stigma. The stigma is pervasive. We don't talk about human sexuality or mental health with kids. Not being accepted, and especially in the faith-based community, not being accepted. Yeah, like being told that you're going to hell, can't be LGBTQ because it's wrong. Gender reveal parties. Yeah, kind of how strongly we've branded gender, right? Not leaving room for any nuance there. Yeah, does anyone want to unmute and share a little bit? Yeah, please. I know it says Andrew on your screen. Go for it. I see you raising your hand. Erin, do you know their name by any chance?
And there you are. You're off mute now. Go for it.
Oh, yeah, please feel free to share. For them to say one or the other. So yeah, non-binary.
Thank you.
So another big statistic that can kind of help us understand why we see so much of kind of these like, oops, let me go back. These sort of like larger statistics here is that 75% of LGBTQ youth reported that they've experienced discrimination based on their sexual orientation or gender identity at least once in their lifetime. And we know this number is probably so much more higher than once. And so when, you know, we live in a world that's already so challenging and so tough, we already have mental health challenges as it is, to be constantly discriminated against for your identity, for something you can't control, and to still be waiting on a lot of like the systems around us to be a little bit more progressive and understanding, it can be really, really tough, right? Every day to navigate that in different spaces. And so I hope this statistic can maybe create a little bit of empathy or understanding around some of the statistics we saw in the previous slide. Something we also want to name is that identifying as queer isn't the cause of this. Like me being gay does not make me more at risk because of that part of my identity. I'm more at risk because me being gay kind of puts a target on my back, right? There's a lot of these additional barriers that I have to face that can amplify mental health challenges I might already be going through. And at the flip side, me being gay has also been such a source of strength and resilience because I've had to learn how to carry that extra weight throughout my life. So I've actually built a lot of resilience through that part of my identity and new communities as well. So these are some different areas that LGBTQ youth may find like additional challenges with. So for example, rejection. Coming out can be stressful for individuals who live in environments that aren't openly accepting. Experiencing homophobia, biphobia, transphobia, those are forms of trauma. And the statistic about suicide that we saw earlier, in families in which the caregivers or the parents reject their youth, that statistic spikes up dramatically as well. In terms of substance abuse, some people may turn to substance use and abuse to cope with negative feelings, which contribute to declining mental health. Definitely an issue in our community that I've seen. In my personal story, I really was struggling with substance use in high school because, you know, when there's stigma around your identity, you're hiding it. You're not able to talk about it with other people. You don't have resources easily available. But when you live in a community where substances are very easily available, and for many youth across LA, that is the case, it's sometimes easier to turn to those less helpful resources. And a lot of, in the queer community, a lot of our safe spaces to gather are in like that nightlife scene. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's also a part of our reality. So something I always advocate for is bring those supports and services out into the open. Like spaces like NAMI have these spaces for queer youth so that they have additional resources to turn to. And at the same time, don't demonize things like substance use. Instead of judging people for using substances, come with a lens of understanding, like what is leading this person to see this as, you know, their main coping mechanism, if that's the case. Homelessness is another big issue. There's a 120% higher risk for LGBTQ individuals to experience homelessness due to being rejected from their homes. Some are even rejected from homeless shelters because of their identity. I experienced homelessness for like a phase in my high school life where I was running away from home because home was just not safe. It wasn't like my parents were abusing me, but my parents didn't understand me. I was angry. I was using substances. I wasn't safe at home. So there was a lot of times in high school where I was leaving the household for like weeks transitioning and housing around different friends' places. You can only stay there for so long, you know? And so, yeah, these statistics, as I'm like reading them, it's so real. And this is part of my experience as someone who lived in LA. And then finally, lack of or having poor mental health care. So many individuals may lack access to adequate mental health care or face biases from health providers when seeking care. Fear of discrimination often deters people from seeking help. I can speak to my experience with this. Like, I remember talking to a doctor for the first time about like STIs and getting tested, you know? And the doctor told me that like, he kind of like was making jokes with me as to like why I was asking to get tested. He was kind of trying to reference to me like as a high schooler that I was too young to even be asking this or thinking about it, and that's an adult conversation. So that layer of like age, but also being queer, like I was already scared to kind of talk about this. So this is like a common issue with healthcare providers. And so it's really great when we have spaces like the LGBTQ Center in LA that has queer affirming services like this, where the counselors are really connected to the community and can really meet the needs. I'm gonna scroll. Yeah, and thanks for dropping these resources in here, the Trevor Project. Speaking of the Trevor Project, they did a survey in 2021 to kind of understand impact during the pandemic. They surveyed 35,000 youth from 13 to 24 years old. More than 80% of LGBTQ youth stated that COVID-19 made their living situation more stressful. Only 1 in 3 LGBTQ youth found their home to actually be affirming. I feel like this generation, like as youth, we're becoming so much more progressive, but oftentimes our households aren't quite there yet, right? And I'm kind of curious, like in this room, would you say that your home is an LGBTQ affirming home, or like where you grew up as a child? Let's say that. Would that household have been an LGBTQ affirming home? Just curious. And you can just put in the chat like yes, no, maybe share a little bit of nuance if you want. If anyone wants to unmute and share, would love to hear. Mine's wasn't, and it wasn't like out of ignorance. It's just cultural differences, generational differences. My parents were raised in Vietnam, so that's such like a hard barrier for them to get past. I see, Liz, my household when I was a child was not very affirming until maybe like age 16 or so with my mother, and when I was an adult with my father. Yeah, very similar to you, Liz. Now, my house is very queer affirming. Back then, not necessarily, and it took a lot of time for it to get there. And Aaron, not at the time of my childhood, but I think perhaps today it would be. Yeah, so these kinds of spaces, I mean, have the potential to create so much impact, even like virtual queer support groups, and thankfully in-person spaces are opening again, because imagine trying to access a virtual support group for queer youth, but you're like at home, you know, you can't really talk out loud and be safe. When I was working at a domestic violence prevention program at the start of the pandemic, we had kids like literally in their closets, like hiding to be part of the workshops and talking really quietly, just because the cultural differences at home, it would create too much conflict for what they wanted to learn about and talk about. So I can only imagine, you know, growing up in this time and being cut off from these resources. Right. So I want to just share this slide, and as you're kind of going through this, if you can pick one that really resonates with you as one that you really want to focus on doing more of moving forward. And these are kind of ways that you can show up for other queer folks in the community in your life. So respect and use preferred names and pronouns, So you see in my name, I have like he, him. Someone may have they, theirs. Someone may have she, her. Someone might have she, they. And just taking the time to honor someone's pronouns, just saying like, yeah, I respect your identity. I don't have to understand it. I have to be comfortable with it, but that's how you are referred to. I'm gonna do that for you, you know? Create and ensure safe spaces for all. So having spaces like this where we can have these conversations and unpack statistics, share about our experiences, having support groups that are specifically tailored for queer youth, having queer facilitators there with them. I know NAMI does a lot of doing this kind of thing, creating these safe spaces. But the safe space might be even like something at home, right? Making sure that the people in your household know it's okay to own their identity and talk about that. Positive representation in media. How are we portraying people in media? How are we advocating to get the right people in those rooms? Report and speak up against homophobia, transphobia, etc. This one can be really challenging sometimes in public spaces, especially with like microaggressions. You know, like growing up with all my friends, like, oh, that's gay. Like, it's really hard to stand up against that peer pressure sometimes, especially when some of this like homophobic, transphobic language gets so normalized in our everyday talk. And then be informed and educated on LGBTQ experiences through listening. If you have queer friends, ask them about their experiences, try to listen, don't try to dictate or narrate. But yeah, just kind of curious in the room, like as you look through this list, which one kind of stands out to you as a way that you want to show up as an ally, to show up for other queer folks in your community? And maybe one of these doesn't really stand out to you. Maybe there's one that you have in your heart that you want to share. So I just want to take a sec if we can, yeah, we can go around and share. We can put it in the chat. We can say it out loud, whatever you want. Yeah, Liz, I totally agree with your comment there. Like, we've made so much progress and there's still a lot to go. Yeah. I feel really happy for a lot of the youth that I see today. It's almost like being queer sometimes seems like cool now, you know? Like, I feel like that's such a drastic difference to even be able to see that in any community versus when I was growing up. And I'm only 26. So I feel like that was a pretty drastic shift in a not so long time. Listen more, seek out more stories. Job and communications, trying to transition to using they, them more frequently. That's awesome. Be informed and educated through listening. Yeah.
Matthew, I love seeing your timeline earlier and just acknowledging that 2015 was the year that it was legal for the LGBTQ plus community to be engaged in a partnership and a marriage, a legal marriage. And that just seems such a thing to really honor so much, and that it wasn't that long ago, like you were saying, you know. So for me, that's something that really landed with me this evening, to see that date and really acknowledge that, and just being more informed. Thank
Absolutely. You. Yeah, that's 7 years. That's really wild to think about. Yeah, something I'm trying to do, even as a queer person, I have so much to work on. And I see it not as like, oh, I'm like failing, I need to work on stuff. I'm excited to work on it. Like, a big part of our history is ballroom culture, Vogue. It's a style of dance that evolved with Black and other POC communities, because where there was a lot of violence and gangs, they found each other and connected. We talked about homelessness and substance use. Like, a lot of queer people were getting kicked out of their homes, and they found family with each other, and they call them houses, right? You can kind of think about them like a dance crew, but they're called houses. They looked out for each other, took care of each other, trained together, and they would have ballrooms where they would like perform, dance together, connect with each other. Legendary is a great show on HBO Max right now that teaches a lot about ballroom culture. And it's a Vogue competition show. So if you want to learn more about queer culture and expression, that's a great one. I really highly recommend. But I feel like the more I tap into these art forms that come from our community, the more I kind of am able to get in touch with myself. So that's something I'm going to be working on. Yeah. So speaking about finding community, right? What's great about, I know we hear a lot of the negatives of social media, but something that's been so cool about social media is it's created these lifelines for people to really connect with each other, to hear each other's stories, to see the representation we may not be able to see in our direct communities, in our families, in our friend circles. So using Discord servers, Facebook groups, Twitters can be good starting places. For me, I love Instagram, following different community leaders like Alok. I don't know if I'm saying their name correct. Yeah, they're non-binary, and they are so poetic and speak so much about challenging gender norms and that binary. And it's helped me free up a lot of like what I think as masculine and feminine and what I let myself express myself as. They kind of gave me that permission slip. But I'm curious, like, where do y'all find community? Do you have any communities either virtually or in person that you've been able to really kind of like, and let's put it with this lens, a community that's let you step into your identity more fully. So whether you identify as LGBTQ or not, wondering if you have a community that lets you step into your identity more fully. I see Nami, of course. Yeah, and if that's your answer, that's awesome. Even if it feels like the obvious answer because we're here. Facebook groups, 1000%. Is there one you recommend, Liz? No worries if that's a lot of pressure.
Matthew, maybe you'll appreciate this because you love to dance. So I recently moved, and I now live across the street from a park. And I was listening, and all of a sudden I said, "Is there's like some party happening over there?" And they were just blasting music. But there's an exercise group that meets on Monday nights and early Saturday mornings at 7:30 a.m. and they exercise to this amazing music. So I was like really intimidated to join, but then I just tried it one time, and so now every Saturday at 7:30 a.m. I dance for an hour with these people that I never met before. So it was a really great way to express yourself, and then there's a lot of other wonderful people that I've met through that.
That's amazing. I love that. Power of dance. Yeah, for me, and Liz, I see your share this, yeah, ACE. And that's one for people who are asexual. I've also been in some other LGBTQ groups, so not really active in those ones. Yeah. I'm like exploring groups with drag queens, like exploring the art of drag. There are especially like API specific drag queens in the community. I think drag has just been like, you know, in mainstream culture, it's really blown up and become so popular. But it's such a special art form in our community. So if you haven't looked into drag, highly recommend it. I think there's also so much stigma like outside of queer spaces around the drag community and a lot of misunderstanding. So yeah, that's an art form on top of Vogue that I really highly recommend looking into, because drag has created a lot of these safe spaces in our community that we gather in. Yeah, some tips on how to be an ally. And as we go through these, if we can all kind of share in the chat, maybe something that you can do to be an ally as well. It could be one of these or just something that it might not be on this list, is not an exhaustive list. But again, recognizing and respecting people's identities and their pronouns, maybe ask when and where it's safe to use pronouns and names. If you mess up with someone's pronouns, just correct it and move on. It's okay, like we make mistakes and it's not like a huge deal. Don't make it so much more of a big deal than it is oftentimes like good advice that I've heard from other people when that happens to them. Defend fellow LGBTQ peers against homophobia, transphobia, biphobia. Don't tolerate like quote unquote harmless jokes that mock the communities. If you can't come up with a new joke, maybe it's not that funny and you should just try something else. But that's what I'll say to some of my like straight guy friends when they're like, oh, it's not that big of a deal, you know. I challenge them to just have better sense of comedy. Make an effort to learn and discuss the concerns of LGBTQ peers when you're hearing about news of like the harm that's being done to trans women across the country. Actually do some research, learn about it, see what's going on, see what you can do to help. Try to be part of that conversation, even if that news is not directly linked to you. Listen to others when they want to talk about their identity. If people are opening up and sharing, maybe it's a family member who's showing some curiosity or some courage to share about what they're interested in, you know, take that interest with them. Yeah, especially youth. It's so special when I think youth are able to express themselves. Don't shame them. Don't make them feel bad. Really welcome them and open that space for them to do that. But yeah, how do y'all feel like you can be allies to the LGBTQ community? Sorry, this keeps going back and forth. What does that look like for you? Because we all have different roles, right? Like Erin, as the executive director of NAMI Westside LA, that's going to look very different than maybe what I feel my role as an ally is. So I'm curious if we can all, maybe everyone put in the chat, or if you want to say it out loud, I'd love to hear it too. But with your context, with your identity, where you are right now, like what does being an ally to queer folks look like this month for you?
Being respectful. Being respectful.
Can you give us an example, Sharon? What is that?
Not being judgmental and just appreciating how anyone presents. It's not for me to judge anyone at any time, anywhere. Just appreciate their gifts to the community and their issues. Just be respectful and be kind and be compassionate always to everyone.
I love that. Absolutely. Sarah, I see making an effort to learn more.
Yeah.
Liz, being a safe space for someone's story and their experience. Yeah, this is a month where, you know, lots of queer people come out either because they feel very empowered, maybe because they feel that pressure of like this kind of time. So you might be someone that, you know, someone trusts with their story or their experiences. So being that safe space for them. Be supportive of LGBTQIA businesses, yes. Creating safe spaces for the community, providing supports and services, education for others. I'm curious, does NAMI have any groups specifically for queer folks that we could help advertise?
We're trying to create some, Matthew. As you know, Elizabeth Stevens, our program director, identifies in the queer community, and she has been working really hard to kind of create those spaces. Sometimes it's difficult in the support group space to create that where you have to identify. And it's not something where you pre-register, people just drop in. So it's a little bit harder, but it is something that we're working on. Also, like a peer-to-peer educational class might be a little bit easier to do because it's a finite amount of time. And so having a class then would maybe develop more of a community to express that specific interest. So then we could then develop a support group that would be more sustainable.
That sounds amazing. I'm super excited to hear more about that. Yeah.
And just as a side note, Elizabeth and one of our UCLA interns really developed this presentation. And so they did a lot of work on this. And Matthew, you're the perfect voice to uplift this message. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. I just went and turned on the lights real quick. It's getting really dark in here. Yeah, I love all these answers. Absolutely. Yeah. And I'll leave my email in the chat box in case anyone's like interested about any resources I could help point you to. Like if there's anything in the presentation today that you wanted to learn more about, but we didn't necessarily deep dive into, this kind of more of a broad overview. So I'm happy to share, resources like research or just like organizations in the community if you're trying to get connected. But here are some additional ones on this slide. The Trevor Project, they have information about the LGBTQ community, mental health statistics. They have a 24/7 text call support line with trained counselors. The LA LGBTQ Center is one of the largest and most experienced providers of LGBTQ healthcare. Like I referenced earlier, they have many locations. They actually, if you want to learn Vogue, they have Vogue instructors from that TV show that teach at some of these locations for free, giving back to the community. So LA is such a cool space to be a queer person. They have 9 locations across LA, and they even help provide housing and safe spaces. There's also lots of school clubs and counselors. So GSA is a very well-known one, Gay Straight Alliance. There's also mental health clubs dedicated to creating safe spaces for queer youth. NM, where's NM? I'm sorry, my acronyms are not. New Mexico, okay. Oh, dang, okay. Well, I know a lot of the services here, they still are going virtual. So you may be able to access some of them potentially. I don't know if they like check home addresses, but thanks for joining us all the way from New Mexico, Liz. That's awesome. And yeah, these are just some of the links that we reference for the research today. So these slides will be shared, I'm assuming, Erin? Yeah.
Yes, we're recording, so this will actually be saved, and then we'll upload it to our YouTube channel. But if anyone wants specific resources, please let us know. I'll put my email in the chat as well if you have any additional questions. Mm-hmm. And usually we kind of open it up for our little Q&A. I know this has been kind of an intimate group tonight, so thank you for really kind of having such a conversational.
Anybody have any questions for Matthew or comments?
Mm-hmm. And I'm happy to stay on like 5 minutes after. So yeah, I don't mind holding that space.
Any questions, any thoughts you'd like to share with Matthew?
Matthew, how can we come see you dance? Or can we see you?
Me and my life as a dancer, you probably won't see that bloom until like December, January. There's some information for off the air about me getting back into my dance life, but yeah, more to come on that. I'll keep y'all posted.
Well, we hope you can see you dance sometime. We'd love to see that.
Definitely, it's a big part of my life. So I will keep you posted.
See you dance.
And I see Sarah, you have your hand raised.
Yes. I went to a graduation, and I have a niece who's high school, 11th going to 12th. And she had a friend there, and the body language between her and her friend seemed very close. That I got a feeling. I have a daughter who's lesbian, and I just got this feeling. And then she has a boyfriend who came after the girlfriend left, the girlfriend. Mm-hmm. And I didn't see that same kind of body language. In fact, it was kind of off. And so I kind of got the feeling that maybe there's a relationship with her and her girlfriend. Mm-hmm. And I feel bad because I don't think she's saying anything to anybody.
Mm,
And I don't know if I should talk to her or bring it up or say nothing.
yeah, yeah. That's
I
such a
don't,
tough position to be in. And I think it's amazing that like how thoughtful you're being about this and, you know, just paying attention to your child like that. I think everybody's different. I think you know your relationship with her the best, but I think something that you can do is like when we talk about making it a safe space at home, right? Maybe it's that when you're talking about things on the TV or when you're talking about celebrities or the news, you're not only talking about straight people, but maybe bring in people who are like queer icons, who are big in the gay community, the lesbian community, the trans community. Maybe talk about RuPaul's Drag Race, like an episode that you saw, like things like that can kind of
yeah.
like drop hints that like, oh, this is safe. So when I'm comfortable to say something, like I know that, you know, this caregiver's or this parent figure is not going to be upset at me or judge me because I've seen them talk about XYZ. Like what was hard for me was when I saw Prop 8 get passed and couples were kissing, my family had the worst reaction. They're like, ew, and they changed the channel. So I was like, all right, I'm never coming out to you. But when I did come out to them, they explained to me like, oh, why'd you wait so long? And I was like, well, when that happened, they're like, sorry, like our culture is just really hard. You know, it was so new to us. We didn't understand, but we never wanted you to feel that way. So finding ways you can create that safe space, I think is really powerful.
It's not my daughter. My daughter I know is lesbian. It's a niece.
Your
who lives
niece.
up in San Francisco and I live down here.
Mhm.
So I don't know if I should bring it up to her or just not say anything.
Yeah, well, I think my same feedback applies. You know, when
Okay.
you're around your niece, you can
Mhm.
still talk about those things, and do it subtly.
Okay.
And maybe talk, you know, if your daughter and your niece are close, you can ask your daughter, and maybe that's their relation. The daughter might be able to talk to her.
Okay.
There's a lot of variables we don't know about, but I think at the end of the day, like if you can create that safe space around someone, if they want to talk about it, if they need someone to talk to, they'll go to them. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions?
What would you tell your younger self? I love that question. I would tell him, you know, I know you're really scared right now. I know a lot of things don't make sense. I know you're angry. I know you're hurting. But the second that you stop caring what people think and you just step into your identity, instead of losing everyone like you think is going to happen, you're going to find all the best people that want to be there for you. You're going to step into your power more than you could ever imagine. Your parents are still going to love you. Like everything is going to be okay. And for the people who don't love you, they're creating space for the right people who will be ready to love you. I feel like if I could tell my younger self that, if I could believe that in my younger self, that would have been so transformative. And that's why I'm so excited to see that for this generation. I see that a lot of them are able to step into that now because of these spaces that we have, these conversations we're having. But yeah, thanks, Steph, for that question.
Any other thoughts, comments, questions? I think your conversation has been very illuminating for all of us, Matthew. Your openness, your sharing your vulnerability. I think the main gift we can give anyone is to share our vulnerability. That is the gift. That is what causes us to be close to one another. And you have certainly done that with all of us in this meeting tonight. I thank you so much for NAMI and for myself and for Aaron and Stephanie and all the people I work with in NAMI. Thank you for being our speaker tonight and being so vulnerable and so authentic.
Thank you so much, Sharon. And thank you, Nami, for having this space and for having me. And yeah, I'll drop my email here below in case anyone wants to get in touch about like resources I might be able to connect them to. And yeah, Aaron, I'll pass it off to you if there's any announcements that Nami has to make.
Aaron, do you have any announcements?
Oh, just thank you all for coming this evening. We really appreciate your time and your energy to come here. We thank Janis Black Warner, who's not here this evening, but she is our sponsor for the speaker series. And we also want to thank Sharon Dunas for holding this space for so many years and really being our guiding light for NAMI Westside LA. And we're not letting you go anywhere, Sharon. So,
It's
so
been
just
such an honor to work with all these wonderful parents and siblings and spouses. It's just been such an honor. And you too, Steph, to work with you. It's just been a total honor for me. And I have such respect for families that are impacted with mental illness in their midst. It's a really hard road to hoe. It's a really hard path to process that we don't get training for it anywhere in life. We don't get training to have a mom who has schizophrenia. We sort of stop and start and 2 steps forward, a step sideways, a step backwards. So I have such respect for families that are struggling with mental illness in their midst. And of course, I have unbelievable respect for those people with a diagnosis that decide to stay on this earth, take their medications, go for therapy, join communities. NAMI Westside LA has a lot of communities for peers to join. We have support groups. We have speaker meetings for the peers. We have an 8-week class for peers, which are individuals with a diagnosis. Getting a diagnosis is so earth-shattering and so identity-shattering. You got bipolar disorder. You're going to have to struggle with it your whole life. You have schizophrenia. You're going to struggle with this your whole life and have, psychiatrists, their famous statement is you're going to have to take meds your whole life. I mean, what a message to give anybody. So I have such respect for individuals who struggle with mental illness and their families who don't desert them, who try to learn as much and be supportive, communicative families and create an environment where someone can get well. So I thank all of you, and I thank you, Matthew, from the bottom of my heart for tonight. I just want to announce we will not have a speaker meeting in July and August. We take the summer off, and we resume again in September with speaker meetings once a month. So we sort of slow down in the summer. All of our support groups and our classes will continue to go on. We just won't have speaker meetings in July and August. And I thank Stephanie, who is our communications person, who sends out all the emails about these meetings. I thank you, Aaron, because you're operating on so many different levels at the same time. Running meetings, being the face for NAMI with all kinds of new groups. We have a new sponsorship with the Jewish Federation. We have the Lowell Milken sponsorship, which is huge and allows us to pay salaries where we can keep staff and people can still live in LA. It's so expensive to live in LA. So I just thank the staff for NAMI Westside and the far-reaching community we have with family-to-family classes, peer-to-peer classes, all our support groups, ending the silence in schools, high schools, junior highs, universities. I've been very grateful to be part of NAMI. I've been part of NAMI since 2005, and it's time somebody else runs the organization. It's somebody else's turn. So I'm turning NAMI over to Adeline Fagan, who, if you haven't met, you will adore her, and Dorit Kahan. They are the 2 co-presidents that are taking over for me. And I want to say goodbye, and I've been so grateful to be part of your lives, however I have been. Thank you. Thank you. So, Aaron, shall we close off, or did you want to say anything else?
I think you're a hard act to follow, Sharon Dunas. So thank you so much for that wonderful farewell this evening. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Marisa, maybe you and I can just stay on, make sure that we get the recording for the YouTube channel.